Each departments, it is my pleasure to introduce to you this morning Mrs. Elane Geller. Mrs. Geller is a child survivor of the Holocaust who will be speaking about the persecution of the Jews, the atrocities that she personally encountered, and her ultimate survival from the Holocaust and the death sentence imposed on some 6 million Jews. It was my good fortune to meet Mrs. Geller last August at the Simon Wiesenthal Museum and Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. The center is an international center that is dedicated to the Holocaust remembrance and to the defense of human rights. Mrs. Geller was speaking that day, as she regularly does, as a volunteer, as part of an enrichment program and an educational opportunity for the public to interface with Holocaust survivors. Mrs. Geller is a nationally sought-after speaker. Her most recent engagements have taken her from coast to coast. Last week, she was in San Francisco at the American Psychological Association conference, and I'm very happy that all of you are here to take advantage of her generous offer to speak at Delta College. The philosopher George Santayana wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." An awareness of the facts concerning the annihilation of some 6 million Jews and other so-called enemies of the Third Reich is one way to ensure that such a human tragedy will never happen again. With that in mind, would you please help me to welcome Mrs. Elane Geller. It's still morning, so good morning, everyone. Let me give you just a very, very brief outline as to the way I conduct this. For me, the most precious part of this will be your questions and our speaking together. You would be surprised at how much is learned by straightening out just one little word that maybe is misplaced. I believe with all my heart and soul that words are extraordinarily powerful. Words can lead us to war and to peace and to poetry, live long beyond our existence on this planet. So nobody during the question period ask me, why get so upset when somebody calls you a name or something? It's just a word. I consider words to be weapons for glory and for destruction, and their power never ceases to amaze me. My name is Elane Norych Geller. Norych was my maiden name. I am a child Holocaust survivor, and simply what that means, in this first section I have a few general things to say, then personal testimony as to how I survived, and then your questions. From the time that I was 4 years old till past 8 really, a period of almost 5 years, I was in one prison, one concentration camp or another, and in fact, the only crime that I was guilty of was that I was born a Jewish child. Now, the Holocaust is all of our problem. Every single person in this auditorium is a survivor. The world has never, nor will it ever be the same. This is not a contest. This is not a ghost story. This is about our lives and our history, yours and mine. I am painfully aware of man's inhumanity towards man. That is going on as we speak. Rwanda, Cambodia, Armenia. I say that we need to study the past in order to recognize the disease when we encounter it. Racism, anti-Semitism, and bigotry is every single bit as contagious as any other communicable disease, in my view. And I'm going to make some guesses here. Hitler wanted to build a master race. Using that as a definition, only tall, blonde, and blue-eyed people had a right to live, in his view. Well, you all know what he looked like. The prototype of what he preached? I don't think so. However, as comical as that image may be, I have this very uneasy feeling that perhaps when he looked in the mirror, he saw exactly what he wanted to see. That's how filled with toxins, with hate, this man was. Now, to everything I'm about to share with you, there are exceptions. Ladies and gentlemen, I am aware that there were some good Germans, certainly, some very good Poles, of course, but we're not talking about them. We bless them. 6 million of my people were targeted and killed. Out of that 6 million, 1.5 million children under the age of 17. Another 5.5 million non-Jews, gypsies and gays, Jehovah's Witnesses, political dissidents, not targeted for genocide. Only the Jews. And from a people that gave us Mozart and Einstein, the most educated, the most erudite, the most affluent, the most cultured people, and the most civilized, by many's opinion, had on its books the law of genocide against a people who were incidentally dispersed. The plan was to murder all of the Jews of Europe, 11.5 million Jews. As it is, 1 out of every 3 Jews was murdered. The 5.5 million non-Jews, and it adds up to about 12.5 million people, not counting soldiers. The 5.5 million non-Jews, every single bit as precious and dear as the Jews. But the distinction in discussing the historical value is that only the Jews were targeted for genocide. No one in this auditorium, I would say, would be a candidate for life if Hitler's laws of superiority and Aryanism were applied. Not one single one of you. During the Spanish Inquisition, we Jews could find some place of safety if we converted. This was not true during Hitler's reign of terror. If you had a drop of Jewish blood in you, you were targeted for annihilation. It was only a question of time. I came to the Museum of Tolerance, then the Simon Wiesenthal Center, when the revisionists, those good folks that want to tell us that this never happened, said that this didn't happen. Much of what we know about this period, and more to come, comes from German records. They were meticulous in keeping records. Now picture, if you will, if tomorrow morning in the world's newspapers you woke up and you saw huge headlines that said, eminent Harvard historian after 10 years of research has concluded that there was no slavery in the United States. I would expect black Americans to be incensed beyond belief, but I tell you guys, I would run for cover if only black Americans were upset. There were, as I said, some good Germans, some good Poles, and there were some good whites during slavery. They smuggled black Americans through tunnels. Does this mean that we not study the period anymore and learn from it and its indignities? So the revisionists want to say that this never happened. I'm here to say, while there's breath in my body, that that's a lie in every sense of the word. I was born in a small town in Poland called Wrocław. The town had in it about 4,500 people, and close to 2,000 of them were Jews. We Jews had lived in Eastern Europe and Poland for hundreds of years. We paid taxes, we served in the army, we did everything that was required of good citizenry. And we were never first-class citizens, not by any stretch of the imagination. My family consisted of mother and father, 2 older brothers, an older sister, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everything I hope all of you in this audience have in your life or had in your life. And we knew that this crazy man was conducting two wars, the war of conquest and the war against the Jews, and though it was not an afterthought, it was fought with equal passion and fervor. We know, and we knew then, that war is bad for everybody, and we also knew it would be worse for us. We had ample history for that. Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism, believe me. He simply perfected it. And so what my father did, as did some other people in our community, we were not exceptional in any way, was he hired a young seminarian to tutor me at age 4, and the kinds of things that I would need to know in order to pass as a Christian child in a small Polish town where all of life's center was around the church. Perhaps in Warsaw or Krakow this might not have been necessary, but in a small town I was given a false birth certificate, a false baptismal certificate. An arrangement was made with a Christian family in our community that should the Nazis come into our town, I would be taken to their home and left there till the war was over. And the day came when the Nazis did come into our town. For some strange reason, the first and most lasting initial memory I have is my father putting on me what seemed like an enormous amount of clothing. Now that I'm an old lady, I realize it doesn't take much for a 4-year-old to feel that way. He took my hand, and as the Jews were being rounded up on their knees in the town square, he and I, and other parents that perhaps did the same, were to walk over quietly and hopefully unnoticed to the Christian home where he was about to leave me. On the way, my father noticed that here and there a door would open up with what appeared to be the head of a household, with a small child at his side, would walk the child up to the SS and say something like, "I don't know who this child is, it's not mine. It must be a Jewish child that wandered in here." That's all it took, just those few words. The child was killed instantly. The family of the child was located and they were killed. Remember, Hitler's motto was to make Europe Judenrein, clean of Jews, zero Jews. No Nazi soldier ever had to explain to anybody why he killed a Jew. One less was to the good of the cause. And also, please keep in mind as I speak, this did not occur in a vacuum. Dummies and uneducated people do not make blueprints for ovens and gas chambers and crematoria. It takes an educated architect to do that. When my father saw this betrayal, he decided to keep me with him. At least this way he felt he would know what my end would be. Ladies and gentlemen, as we survivors are getting older and older, and there are fewer and fewer of us left, some will go to their graves, not being certain that the child they left in the care of others was either turned over to the Nazis when the Jews were evacuated out of the town, or the family became very fond of the child, baptized it, converted it, and hid it from the Jewish family member when they came after the war to get it. We have ample stories of that kind as well. We have a great deal of kindness from many, many non-Jews that helped us at risk to their own lives and saved our children. But many, many did not do that. My father and I then joined the rest of the Jews in the town square where my family was. It took about 20 minutes for all of this to happen. By the time we got there, 2 of my uncles were already dead. My father's youngest brother had a loaf of bread under his arm. In that bread, he stuffed some jewelry. Very common way of hiding things, a few things of value, so that you could use it to bribe somebody or get a favor or something. The bread fell, it broke open, the Nazi soldiers saw the jewelry, they killed him, they killed his brother-in-law with him, my aunt's husband. Around the large group of we Jews were small clusters of people, pulled out of the community for different jobs. Now, they may have had some special skills that the Nazis needed right away, but that doesn't mean that their life was going to be spared just because they had those skills. The caloric intake of a Holocaust prisoner was 400 calories a day, 200 in the morning, 200 at night, a piece of black bread, Schwarzbrot, and some dirty water that was supposed to be soup. And this is not a diet designed for life. It's a diet for attrition. In one of these groups was being shot at, not too far from where my family was. People were bleeding and falling down and dying and screaming. And in that group were my grandparents and my mother. And my grandparents were very, very elderly. Others like them were killed immediately in that setting. Why bother to load them on a truck and then kill them? Where was the efficiency in that? My mother was recovering from something very minor, and the few other people that were in the same situation were killed the same way. They weren't going to put her on a gurney and get her well and then kill her. Again, that wouldn't have been efficient. And we were quickly moved out of the center of town to a small camp. Camp was surrounded by electrified barbed wire. We were given armbands with yellow stars of David on them. It was the moment, the very moment that our freedom was over. Different family members were sent to different work camps, death camps. You never knew if you'd ever see them again, where they were going. My 16-year-old sister was sent to a place called Auschwitz, where at 16, she died in the ovens of Auschwitz, and her crime, she was born a Jew. A word about Auschwitz. Hitler tried twice to get into office through the electoral process, right through the front door. He came very close to winning the first time and lost. The second time he won. It was during a time when the economy of Germany was in terrible shape. There were no jobs. It was the perfect climate, the quintessential climate for scapegoating. The Jews are taking your jobs. They're taking your children's place at university. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews. I think we can all remember when scapegoating worked in our own state, or tried to work. And so the second time he won. And all of a sudden, like magic, this place called Auschwitz pops up. It had not been there before. The people in the surrounding area could see the smoke of Auschwitz belching out, spewing out smoke that smelled of human flesh burning. And suddenly they had jobs. They were making pillows out of human hair, and jewelry out of gold inlay, and fertilizer out of our bones. Nobody asked, where are these jobs coming from? What in fact is going on over there? Things were getting better. Just as German businessmen who sat in large offices and bid on government contracts for enormous volume of Cyclone B gas, barbed wire, striped cloth, and things were better for them as well. Next, my father's sister, my aunt, and I were sent yet to another place called Stekachin. And what my father tried to do in the very beginning was not possible later on. Anybody that came into the camp he was in that perhaps knew the family, he would say, did you see my sister or my young daughter? And if the answer was yes, with one of those valuables that he managed to hide, he would bribe somebody and get us brought to where he was. And my father located my aunt and I in Stekachin. It was arranged for her to be snuck out in the middle of the night. I was thrown over electrified barbed wire onto a large transport truck filled with coal. Both my aunt and I were buried under that coal and told not to make any noise. These vehicles are routinely inspected during wartime with large searchlights. For a very brief time, we were reunited with my father and brothers, and then all of us were sent to a huge work camp called Skarjisk. The camp was so large I never saw my father and brothers again till the war was over. I didn't know if they were there. I didn't know that I thought about it even, if they were there or they were in another country or they were dead. Didn't know. My aunt was put to work in a munitions factory. There were a few other children there. The most educated guess is that the children that were there were kept as pets. Very few children survived as I did the entire time in the camps. Children were hidden, children were snuck out, but very few survived as I did. My aunt, and I'm sure the other caregivers, all said the same thing. When I'm not with you, don't be in anybody's face. Stay out of the way. Hide if you hear footsteps. Just don't call attention to yourself. Believe me, I obeyed her. I wouldn't be here talking to you. Many, many times when I wandered out, I got into trouble. I had typhoid, typhus, tuberculosis, none of these treated by doctors. You brought a child to the so-called infirmary, you never saw it again. In fact, you brought anybody sick, you never saw them again. I had lice and rats in my hair. I stole. I ate toothpaste. I drank urine. I did whatever was necessary to fill my belly and stay alive. Many times when I wandered out, I was forced to watch hangings. One time, just for fun, 2 SS soldiers looked at me, looked at each other and said, "Look at this hair. It's too pretty for a Jewish child." And they shaved me bald. When my aunt came back from work and started to cry because she could hardly recognize me, they beat her with a rubber hose. Another time, they addressed a pack of German shepherds. They talked to the dogs as though the dogs were human and I was the dog. And they said to the dogs, "Mensch, beiß dem Hund." People, bite this dog. And I was attacked by the shepherds and mauled and chewed on. And I screamed and I begged and I cried. And eventually they called the dogs off. The physical scars are well healed. The emotional scars are not. I promise you, to this day, to this second, I go nowhere that I don't make certain that the dog or the pet you have and love, and I hope treat well, is behind a locked door where a younger sibling or somebody not knowing can open that door. When I'm confronted with a loose animal, I have what is commonly known as a flashback. I become once again that child of the Holocaust, begging and pleading for mercy, and with it comes a loss of dignity, and sometimes it takes just a few minutes and I'm fine. And other times it takes much longer before I wander out of my home comfortably. Next, we were packed into railroad cars, the conditions of which I cannot even begin to describe to you. Only to tell you that all of your bodily functions were performed right where you were standing. But what I remember most of all is my aunt's screams as she begged the other inmates not to eat me alive. That train was taking us to a place called Bergen-Belsen, where a young woman named Anne Frank died. And before you ask me, she was about 9 years older than I. She was there for a very short time with her sister. Her sister died almost immediately when she got to Belsen, and Anne died within 3 weeks before liberation. She was not well, and there's a current documentary that speculates that she knew her mother was dead, and she saw her sister die, and she was pretty certain, she thought, that her dad, Otto Frank, was dead too. And he was not, of course. He survived for many years afterwards. And the educated wisdom says that if she had known that her father was still alive, she might have hung in there a little longer. The train stopped a good distance outside the barracks. We marched to the barracks on ground that was solid ice. Our feet froze. My feet froze so badly that when they began to thaw out, my aunt would stick her fist in my mouth so I wouldn't call attention to myself. Because the war was coming to an end, they wanted no witnesses, and at that point, any excuse at all to shoot you was a welcome one. Wanted nobody to do exactly like what people like myself are doing. Coming into these barracks in Bergen-Belsen were women from all parts of Europe. Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria. Many, many of these women had already lost their children. And the sight of a child of my age, and by then I was past 8, would literally break their hearts. I didn't care. I would go up to these different nationals. I would ask them to teach me a song in their language, like Frère Jacques, or London Bridge, or anything. Then I'd go off into a corner and practice it. When I thought I knew it well, I'd go back to the woman that taught me the song. With my hand open, I would sing to her. She would be crying. She would give me whatever little bit of food she had. I promise you, she needed it more than I did. I was liberated with my aunt by the British. I need to tell you that the 1.5 million children under the age of 17 gotten in very large part the following way. The Nazis would say, "Mothers and children, you're going to a Kinderheim, a children's home." They were very clever. All of this was well thought out. They figured if they would go up to a young mother and grab her toddler or her infant from her, at the very, very least, there would be hair pulling and screaming and crying and begging. They didn't want their soldiers to have to deal with that. So they said, these women are not stupid. They'll be very grateful that they can accompany their babies. They'll go quietly, leaving behind them teenagers as old as some of you in this audience, hoping you looked older and could pass as adults and be put to work and live another day. Every single day that you lived, your chances increased of survival. My aunt always said she was my mother. I was freed with my aunt in Bergen-Belsen by the British. One of my brothers was freed in a place called Buchenwald. The other of my brothers and father were freed in Theresienstadt, Czechoslovakia. That, very, very briefly, is my testimony to what happens when our concern for the ozone layer, for the rainforest, and before you get hysterical, I care too. But I promise you we don't have to worry about that if we don't do the ecology of ethics and morals, and we don't attend to this. Please bear in mind as I conclude, news of the Holocaust was on page 42 of the New York Times. People look the other way. You need to be empowered. You need to treat your children, yourselves, to say, when somebody says in your little area, all Jews are this, all blacks are this, all Hispanics are this and this, all Asians are this, you need to open your mouth and say, I don't know all Jews, I don't know all Hispanics, I don't know all blacks. This is not about teaching you to hate anybody. Quite the opposite. This is about prevention. We went from there to DP camps, refugee camps, displaced persons camps. We needed to be documented, we needed to be treated medically, and most of all, we needed to find a way of getting off German soil. One of my brothers, the older of my two brothers, none of whom are living any longer, put an ad everywhere, the Red Cross and the Jewish paper, and the paper called The Forwards, which was then a daily, now is a weekly in English, and perhaps in Yiddish too, I don't know. And he said, I'm Jacob Norych, I'm looking for family in the United States. And I came, my uncle found this, my father's brother lived in the United States. His last name was Warshawski, wasn't Norych, he came with someone named Warshawski, just took their surname. He did everything he could when he recognized that that ad was from his brother's child to get us here on the first boatload of refugees to come after the Holocaust in 1946. I came to the United States and entered kindergarten at age 9. I will conclude and take your questions only to tell you that you need to speak up. That when I came to this country, the buzzword was the United States is a big melting pot. I have to defer to the Reverend Cecil Murray, who's the head of the AME Church in Los Angeles. He says it better, I think. He says America should be like a large tossed salad, where all the ingredients live in harmony, retain their favor, their individual tastes, shared in one bowl with a common dressing, and their individualism remains. I thank you for your welcome. I am privileged to be here in front of you, and I pray that you find just one kernel and that you do with your anger, and there's plenty of reasons to be angry in this world. Life's not fair, guys, but you take your anger and don't let somebody else define you, and you become an activist. Thank you very, very much. I will take your questions. I don't think we have mics in the audience, so if you're going to ask a question, shout it or have somebody, telephone it down. Yes, please. And I will repeat the questions, guys, in the back.
I'd like to know, how do we go about trying to educate people that the Holocaust did happen? Why is it that people cannot realize that?
The question is, how do we go about educating people that the Holocaust did happen? You're going to be surprised at my answer. And why is it that people believe that? Okay? PBS did a program about, I guess it's a year ago now. I don't know exactly. I taped it. It was called The Longest Hate. Again, racism is alive and well. I believe, and I spoke to a very special young man who's in the audience, we talked about that briefly earlier today. I believe that there will always be racism and anti-Semitism and all that good stuff. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Museum of Tolerance, incidentally, is a social action museum. We do not just worry about Jewish issues. We worry about those lovely people in sheets. We worry about neo-Nazis and Aryan nations. And I believe that we have to be on the journey to make this world slightly better than we found it. And the way that we do that is to educate and to empower. Now, in terms of the revisionists who say this never happened, I imagine, like anything else, why do they do that? They're anti-Semites. Do we need to be fancy about this? I don't think so. And they know it plays well in Peoria. You know that expression? How is it playing in Peoria? It plays well in Peoria. Anti-Semitism is a rallying force to anyone that wants headlines. Okay? Now, it's very, very chic not to be racist and not to be anti-Semitic, so you go under. But early on, when the revisionists, and by the way, these are not kooks. Some of them have chairs at universities. They are mainstream people. That's what's so scary. The way that I deal with them is not to deal with them. Not to put them on Geraldo's show or Oprah's show or forget Jerry Springer. I mean, you guys, take a good look at who comes on those shows. They've got the brains of peas. They're lowest on the food chain. They can't think for themselves. They want attention. They can't speak the language, probably can't read. But they get on TV, and the horrible part of it is that if your school officials went to all the newspapers in your community and said, there's a woman coming in from LA, she's going to speak to us about empowering ourselves to be more ethical and more moral, based on being able to recognize the disease of racism and anti-Semitism, somebody would yawn in their face. But if they came and they said, hey, we had some neo-Nazis mark swastikas, every TV camera would be here. Big headlines. So we, all of us in here, we have to respond by ignoring them. When you put a neo-Nazi, a revisionist, a Tom Metzger on TV in that box, you give them the legitimacy that you would give Dr. King, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Moses, Jesus. They become somebody to reckon with. Television makes you legitimate. And the only way to undo this, what for God's sakes do you think the Hitler Youth was? It was a gang. It was a gang that had fancy boots and leather jackets. And the only thing that should not be for sale is your brain. There is no price on your ability to think critically for yourself. That's what I think. Ignore them. Laugh at them. Do not engage them. I will not, and neither are most Holocaust survivors, those of us left, will not appear, I've been invited, on the same panel. What am I going to discuss with them? Are we discussing whether the earth is flat or round? I don't think so. I'm going to sit there and discuss whether the pain that lives within me, and by the way, I don't want you to be sad. What I have is and you could ask me anything, no matter how personal. If I don't want to answer it, I won't. I am terrific up here in the margarita zone, you know? I'm pretty good down here in the sad zone. I have a lot of problems in the middle area, but I'm working on it. I'm not finished. I'm a work in progress. So, no. We need to be responsive to what's going on. Any other questions? Right over there, and then you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to know if everything that happened to you, did that destroy your feeling of trust toward humanity? And if it did, how long did it take you to start trusting again?
It's an excellent question. Did the events of my childhood affect my ability to trust? In some bizarre way, it did just the opposite, but equally harmful. You see, I don't have a problem with the word guilt. I know this is not very in today, but I've never met a person that's entirely free of guilt that I've had any use for. Now, I'm not talking about debilitating, crippling guilt. Oh my God, I can't get out of bed guilt. I'm talking about the rethinking and saying, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. I have an enormous responsibility because my life's been spared, self-imposed. I feel that my life should be, at the very least, ethical and moral. And I feel for the privilege of having been spared that I trust everybody. You cannot believe the trouble I get into. But it's a price I'm willing to pay. So I think that's the way to answer your question. Does that answer? You can challenge me if it doesn't. There was a lady in red that had a hand up. Yes?
You know, I was always, what I've seen on television and everything, but I was always wondering, was there a way for the Jews to fight back during that time? Was there any that did fight back to get weapons in any way?
Thank you so much for that question. This is the part that's important. This nice lady said that she wondered if we Jews had a way of fighting back. In fact, if we did. I'm going to say to you that we fought back. We fought back. And I'm going to tell you how. First of all, there is an unbelievable documentation of the resistance and the partisan movement and the sabotaging that young Jews and non-Jews did in the forests, underground, the sabotaging that went on. In the camps themselves, nobody comes into a country and gets people to follow them without setting them up for it. The theme, this should sound familiar, was that the Jews are less than animals. And that the fact that we never got spoons in the camps, it was to fulfill the prophecy that we slurped our food, that we were uncivilized. The documentation shows that very little uncivilized behavior went on. Now, could we have all gotten up and left? No. The answer is no. Because if you've ever tried to leave your country and go to another country, it takes a lot of money. There are quotas. There are visas. There are things to do. We in Eastern Europe were by and large not very wealthy. And I know all this garbage about Jews being wealthy, okay? I know plenty of Jews on welfare. And we are less than 2% of the population of the world, guys. And if we're so goddamn smart, how come there are so many cliches and stereotypes on TV if we own the media? We're not too smart then, are we? This is all nonsense. I just don't have another life to fight that one, but you know. We have that with every minority. We have it with blacks. Blacks are either junkies, drug dealers, or they're brain surgeons. There are no, nice, ordinary folks like the rest of us. Jews are always shyster lawyers, very smart. They give the orders for the destruction of the world. I didn't see the movie, but I was really thrilled to hear that Jeff Goldberg, what was that movie? The big, scary one that... Yeah, didn't he give the order to do some horrific thing? But he was the Jew of the piece. So don't tell me about stereotypes. I'm telling you, we fought back. We are a lunar calendar people, so the people that were observant, we remained decent, we observed, and we had no help. But we fought back in that we remained civilized, and we had hope, even when there was no hope to be had. You can't fight back a regime that's standing over you with machetes and tanks. Yes?
What has Germany done since after the war? What have they done to address the past? What have they done as far as legislation goes, or as far as UN legislation's gone?
The question is, what has Germany done to address the past and so on? It's a very good question as well. Initially, very little. There are German tourists that years ago, it happens less now, but years ago, young students would come and they'd say, we never heard, crying, hugging me, kissing. So we never heard any of this. That's changed. I recently spoke to a teacher from Austria that came and heard me lecture and said that a German philanthropist, an Austrian philanthropist, has given a scholarship so they can take the children to Auschwitz and Mauthausen and places like that. German government has paid, I of course got nothing, and there's a reason for that, is paying what they call Wiedergutmachen, reparations to Holocaust survivors that apply and go through that process. As a young person, I applied. I was about 20 and newlywed at the time, and went to the German embassy in Chicago, and a man who clearly was in the army looked at my application and said, Bergen-Belsen, where was that? Couldn't have been in Germany. And I got hysterical, and my then husband said, I don't want you to go through this, and I never applied. They are educating their children more with pressure from the outside world, and they have pretty good relationship with the State of Israel, and there are plenty of good Germans who are trying. See, the German psyche, we all have baggage, guys. If I get into a fight every single day that I open up my door, at some point I'm going to have to say, there's something inside me I have to look at. Now, people were asking me right after Berlin was unified, they say, what do you think about the unification of Berlin? I found it to be a very amusing question, because it is not a Jewish fear. Berlin was always meant to be reunited. They were just asked to slow them down a little bit. But the European countries surrounding Germany are the ones that fear Germany's power more than any Jewish person does. So, I think the German people, for the most part, although there is a tremendous resurgence of anti-Semitism and Nazism, but it is by no means the majority, and they are addressing the issue now. They did not initially. Right there. Could you speak louder?
Correlation in this country today between the anti-affirmative action movement and the early Hitler anti-Jewish propaganda?
No, I do not. The question is, I see it as a problem, by the way, okay, you guys. The question, I'll repeat the question, it's a good one as well. Do I see any correlation between the voting down of the voting down of Prop 209, isn't it, of the affirmative action, and the early on Hitler propaganda and so on? No, and you have to be very careful. You asked the question of the right little body, you know. See, we have to be careful, guys. It depends on how you approach an offense. Now, during World War II, there was no state of Israel, for example. So the Jews that had power, that let's say knew President Roosevelt, they went in the back door of the White House. They didn't have any diplomatic credentials. We have diplomatic credentials to deal with the injustices of the voting down of the help on Prop 209. We have a legal way. And to compare everything to Nazis is not fair. It's not fair. Because, first of all, we have the right to speak publicly. For God's sakes, think of Skokie. Neo-Nazis are protected under the law just as well as you and I are. And they should be. Pains me to say this, but they should be. Because I'm telling you, if we don't protect those rights for everybody, we won't have them for ourselves. I think that we have to be very careful. Affirmative action, like any other government institution, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, needs to be looked at, let's say every 10 years. There is something, and it's not going to be perfect. But I certainly don't want to, I'm a capitalist, but I don't want to live in a world where I don't feel that I need to put back. That if people are discriminated against, if they need the extra push, they won't get it. But I don't need to make a holy cow out of everything that's voted down. But I need to kick up my heels. I am very upset that it was voted down, and I wasn't even that sure. I have some questions, but I think I'd rather err on the side of having a few people misuse something that is basically so positive. Do you understand? So I think, I get things like this. I get people saying, what do you think that that's the way it's supposed to be? It is to give us something to do. You may retire from your job, but you're never going to retire from the business of trying to keep yourself, your community, your country more ethical and more moral in a country that has choice and is sometimes very unfair. But we've got mouths, we've got the ballot box, we've got letters we can write, we've got lots of things we can do. And we have the ability to do them in this country. It is not a perfect country. It is not a fair country. But I tell you guys, I've lived elsewhere and it's the only game in town. And by the way, I don't know how much more time I have, 5 minutes, but I will tell you, I do believe in relativistic everything. Come on. If somebody jumps you and rapes you in an alley and a husband forces himself on his wife, it's still rape, but it isn't the same crime. It's wrong, both are wrong. So, yeah, there are lots of injustices in our country and in our world, God knows. But I tell you, none of us are ever going to be out of a job and trying to make this a better world. Yes, way back.
If I could address the young lady who said, why didn't the Jews fight back? There were quite a few prison camps where the Jews actually escaped, where especially they were Russian soldiers. And Hitler was so mad about it that he had it bulldozed and obliterated from existence.
And
Warsaw,
let me take that. 55 days, the Warsaw Ghetto was, the Nazis were kept at bay with bottles and whatever. Sobibor. And by the way, if you escaped, all 6 death camps were in Poland. That's not an accident, guys. So if you escaped and you were caught, you were turned back in. Yeah, thank you.
documentary film right on campus about Bergen-Belsen. When the British came in, they had some cameramen and silent film because they didn't have.
Bergen-Belsen was the most diseased of the camps.
You may be in there.
I think I am in there.
Check it out. It's called Memories of the Camps.
Oh, I will check it out. Thank you.
British comes to Rome, 101 camps. Later they found out there were over 1,000 camps.
They're finding out more. You know, you guys, those of you that roll your eyes and say, oh my God, another Holocaust, you know, like, oh my God, another thing about slavery or Cambodia. I have very bad news for you, or good news for you if you want to be open-minded. It's just the tip of the iceberg. By law, some things are not released till certain years. I don't know how they decide that. There's stuff coming out right now. More stuff. Lady in the white.
Are there accurate records of the Holocaust victims, and if so, are they open to the public, and where can you get them?
Could somebody wire this down to me?
Are there accurate records of the Holocaust victims, and if so, are they available to the public?
Yeah.
And where can you get these records?
You can get any information at all, and more to come with the help of Mr. Spielberg, who's got this wonderful Shoah Foundation. Yes, I've been interviewed for that. At the Museum of Tolerance, for example, we have a whole floor. We have library too, but we have a whole computer floor where you can access any information about the Third Reich.
And did you go to the Jewish celebration of the birthday of the Jewish religion in Israel?
No, I did not. Yes, I'm sorry. You know, I neglected you all.
How do you feel about God? Is your faith the same as it was with your family? Or is it changed with all the time?
Question is, how do I feel about God? First of all, it's a terribly flattering question. See, when my brothers, whenever they would look at me, they were always had tears in their eyes. But because they could not even bear that I lived through that. I was so young that I had no heavy theological questions. The statistics show that there were some Jews who were very observant who said, if God could see this, I'm never practicing again. They didn't leave the faith, they just didn't. And then there was the reverse. People said, if I could survive this, I've got to thank God. My own theology is that I have to believe in a higher power. If I thought that there wasn't some reason, and I don't have to know the reason, why my life was spared, I don't think I could get out of bed in the morning. So my personal belief is that we need to celebrate our differences and celebrate our different religious joys and live together. I think somebody give me the high sign. Thank you all very much for your questions. Thank you.
If you could just wait for one moment, please. We just have a gift that we'd like to present to Mrs. Geller. This is Amy Yoakum, one of your classmates.
On behalf of everybody at Delta, I would like to express our gratitude and our appreciation for sharing your story with us. Your message is an important one, and unfortunately, it's one that must often be repeated. Hopefully, by sharing your story, you will have lit the torch of inspiration in many of us to continue to fight against racism, anti-Semitism, and prejudice. So on behalf of Delta, I'd like to present you with a small token of our appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today.